Hello, this is Dr. Kamani, licensed clinical psychologist. I am here talking to Black women in toxic jobs. How do you find a Black therapist? And this video is another reaction video to when Stephanie Perry recently interviewed me about Black women leaving toxic jobs. And I was really compelled to do this video with looking at the comments. So it's about 700 comments, about 29,000 views on that video, and just very concerning in terms of how many Black women have experienced toxic jobs. And so there's a lot of us who've had this experience, and we are in need of support. Okay. And so I'm here just briefly to just talk about how do you find a Black therapist? Okay. So I will put the link for the interview and my reaction to that video in the description section. But when we think about how to find a Black therapist, I think it's important, number one, to be aware of what are the signs that you may need support, okay? So it's very important to pay attention to the signs because I know a lot of times as Black women that we are on the move and we feel like we don't have time to rest. We don't have time to think about what's going on with us because we got to handle the business, right? And there's so many things that we're juggling. But we have to pause and take a moment to take care of ourselves because if we're not okay, everybody else is not going to be okay, right? And if we don't pay attention to that, then some really bad things can happen to us, okay? So, number one is recognizing the signs that your job is toxic, recognizing the signs that your job may be causing you physical, psychological, and or spiritual harm, okay? Because many times a toxic job can be a form of trauma, okay? So in terms of recognizing the signs, I've had interviews with Black women over a year on my YouTube channel, Lifting as We Climb Consulting Wellness Services, where I've been talking to Black women about their experiences in toxic jobs and about their healing journey, okay? So they've been very open about their healing journey. I've talked about my healing journey, and I really want you to know that you're not alone. So on the YouTube channel, it talks about women sharing their experiences, and I have it organized in terms of profession. So you can see in terms of people who might have similar professions as you, what their experiences are like, right? So a lot of times there's a lot of overlap. There's some specificity, right? But you can see what their experiences may be, right? I've also had like more recent interviews, like yesterday, I had my sister from another mother, Colette Elizabeth, on, and she was talking about, actually, we were talking together about our signs in terms of being in a toxic job and the impact it's had on us. We talked about, the job having a sense of dread, on a Sunday, particularly Sunday evening, knowing that you have to go back to that job and having that sense of dread. So what are the signs that you have in your own life that this job is harming you? So pay attention to the signs, okay? A lot of times we keep going, keep going, keep going, and we don't recognize it until the signs are really bad to the point we can no longer ignore it. Okay, so number one, be aware of the signs. Number two, what are you doing in terms of when you recognize that you might need support, are you actually getting that support? Many times for us in the Black community, there's been stigma about mental health. I would say during the pandemic, that's gotten a little bit better in terms of recognizing the need for mental health support. A lot of people talking about that. But within your family, within your community, is there a stigma of mental health treatment? And if there is, really recognizing that you are doing this for yourself and what you need, right? So for what you need for yourself, what you might need for your family as well. And so when there's the stigma of mental health, I tell people you don't have to tell people that you're going to a therapist. That's nobody's business, right? You don't have to tell that, okay? So also recognizing that you owe it to yourself to get the support that you need, okay? My aunt told me nobody else is living your life but you, okay? So remember that and get the support that you need. So let's say you've moved past and you're thinking, okay, I want to get therapy. I don't even know what do I need to do to even find a therapist, okay? So first I want to distinguish between therapy and coaching because there's some confusion in terms of the difference between the both. So therapy deals with more in terms of looking at your history, looking at ways your history may be impacting your current functioning, and ways that gives you some tools in terms of ways to heal from issues that you're dealing with. Okay. So it does a lot of times a deeper dive, right? So you look at the past and how it's impacting the present and how to address things in terms of different resources, right? In terms of healing resources. Coaching more so deals with specific steps or tools to address a specific issue. Okay. So there is a difference with therapy. Therapists are licensed, in terms of they're governed by the state. So there's some recourse with coaches. I think there's some certification with that as well. But just be clear that you know the difference, okay? Also be clear that whoever you work with, therapist or a coach, that you have thoroughly researched that person, okay? So just don't go off somebody that, you saw an ad for, okay? Make sure that you thoroughly research that person, okay? And then when you research them, part of what you want to do is interview them too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about interviewing a therapist, okay? Before that, I want to talk about different ways to find a Black therapist. So one of the options is that if you have insurance, you can go through your insurance carrier and you can ask them if they provide listings in terms of Black therapists. So some insurance carriers do have it listed that way, some do not, okay? Now, if they do have therapists and they tell you it's a Black therapist, you would contact that therapist and we'll talk about how to interview. Okay. There might be situations where they may not have Black therapists available, or they can't tell you if it's a Black therapist, or there might be some other issues, right? So, what you want to ask them is, will they cover outside providers? Will they cover for outside mental health providers? And if they do, will they reimburse you if you submit a super bill, right? So, a super bill involves you paying the therapist giving you a super bill, and then you taking that to your insurance company for reimbursement. Okay. So that's another option. Then you have other options in relation to, you can look at online directories like Therapy for Black Girls or the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. The Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation does have certain campaigns throughout the year to support the mental health of Black people and mental health awareness. And they have these campaigns where you can have 5 free virtual sessions, okay? And so you go, you contact the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. I'll put that information in the description section, and you apply, right, to see if you can access those services. So I know that I'm on the directory. There's a lot of people on the directory, and you can find the people by state, right? So as a therapist, you have to look at, is that therapist licensed within the state that you reside, okay? So that's an option. Another option for free therapy is the Loveland Foundation. So the Loveland Foundation, shout out to Rachel Cargill, because that's her organization. The Loveland Foundation also provides therapy vouchers for Black women, so free therapy services. So again, I'll put that information in the description section. I know Rashida Dow did a video also about how to access therapy. So I'll put her video in the link. So you have all these different resources. There's also Psychology Today. So Psychology Today has a large platform in terms of locating therapists. Psychology Today also has an option for therapists to do a little video so that you can kind of hear the therapist talking about their services, okay? So there's a lot of different options available for you in terms of finding a therapist, okay? Now I want to talk to you about how to interview a therapist, okay? It's very important to interview a therapist. So generally what happens is that when you find a therapist and you connect to that therapist, you'll have like a free consultation call, like a 15-minute free consultation call. During that consultation call, make sure that you're interviewing the therapist, okay? Some of the things that you may want to ask, particularly if you're a Black woman and you're seeking support due to a workplace trauma, right? Or being in a toxic workplace, you want to ask the therapist if they have experience working with Black women who have a history of trauma in the workplace, right? So you want to make sure they have that experience. If that therapist does not have a history of working with trauma and or working with workplace trauma, that probably is not a good fit for you. Okay. You want someone who has that experience and someone who can really walk you through, right? So someone who's not questioning or doubting you, right? So someone who has that level of expertise in that area. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that you want to ask them, what is your therapeutic approach? So how do you work with clients, right? What is your framework? For me, generally people come in, they have the intake session where I ask a lot of background history questions just so I best understand them and know how to best support them. Then we come up with treatment goals. So, what are the main issues that's causing them distress at this point that we want to work on together? And we'll keep monitoring the progress towards that treatment goal. Once that goal is met, do we come up with an additional goal or do we start tailoring down treatment? Okay. So for me, and again, it's very important to ask your therapist, how do they operate, right? So for me, I want to make sure that I am supporting why the client has come in terms of we're working together, right? And also, I want therapists to eventually be able to kind of decrease the frequency in which they have sessions. So they're not in therapy forever, right? So they know there's an end point at some point, right? So when they start feeling that level of confidence, like, okay, I got this, I have the tools, I'm good. Maybe I might come back every now and then for a booster. That's all good. Okay. So just be very clear with your therapist asking that question. Okay. You also want to ask them, what is their cost, right? So, what is their out of pocket cost? Do they accept insurance? If they do accept insurance, do they accept your insurance? If they don't accept insurance, do they provide you with a super bill so you can get reimbursed, right? Do they have a sliding scale? Um, are they on any type of panel in terms of those free therapy services that I talked about? So those are very important questions to ask. You also want to ask them in terms of scheduling. Do they have the availability to see you weekly? Because initially when you come in for therapy, the protocol generally is that you're seen every week. And then as your symptoms improve, it kind of taper down to like once every 2 weeks, then once a month, and then as needed. Okay. So you want to make sure that you ask your therapist those questions. Okay. Now, when you ask them those questions, the most important thing for me too is that you want to see, like, how do you feel talking to that therapist? Do you feel a sense of connection with that person, like in your gut? Do you feel like they understand what you're dealing with, and do you feel that they can really help you? Okay, so really pay attention to that inner voice. Okay, so those are the things in terms of how to interview a therapist. Now let's talk about the expectations for you as a client. Okay, so if you're coming into therapy, just know that it's very important to be honest about what's going on with you and your history, right? Because a therapist can only help you with what you share. So if there's certain parts about your life or certain issues that you're not sharing with your therapist is not able to fully support you. So it's very important to be honest because if you're not honest, you're not really helping yourself, okay? So honesty. The next thing is the importance of you being consistent. So consistently attend your sessions. Now, emergencies happen. We understand that, right? But if you're coming to session like once every 2 months, that's not really going to be helpful to you. Okay. So really commit to coming to therapy as you and your therapist kind of establish the frequency of sessions. Please try to follow that as much as possible. The next thing is cancellations. If you need to cancel or reschedule, please follow your therapist policy in terms of their cancellation notice, right? So I know I have a 48-hour notice, right? So please give me 48 hours notice if you're going to cancel, because I have other clients who may want to reschedule their appointment, right? Or I might have an intake who wants to schedule, but if you have that slot taken and you don't show up, then that inconveniences other people, right? And recognize that therapists, this is their livelihood too, right? So they need to know in terms of who's coming in for sessions or not. Also, in terms of for you, if you're in session and you're with your therapist and you feel like your therapist does not quite get what you're saying, or you disagree with your therapist, or let's say your therapist makes a recommendation or says some homework for you, and you're like, that doesn't fit for me, or I don't agree with that, please speak up, okay? Because what happens sometimes is that people don't speak up and they just end up dropping out of therapy. Or they start telling a therapist bits and pieces and they're not fully engaged in therapy, okay? So that doesn't help you. So again, be open. If you disagree with your therapist, please have a conversation with your therapist, okay? The other thing is cost. Please make sure this is an agreement that you have with your therapist. Please make sure you're paying your therapist, okay? Because again, it's their livelihood. And again, when you don't show up, then that affects their income as well, okay? So these are just the general things in terms of how to find a Black therapist. Now, I do want to say also, there's additional resources to support you as well. So therapy is one, right? But there's also in terms of religion, spirituality. There's other resources in terms of life coaching, like I talked about before. So Ivana does life coaching. Stephanie Perry does, if you want to take a sabbatical or house sit. As Anne-Marie Archer does, if you want to leave a toxic job and leave with your coins, she's available, right? Not for coaching, but she does consultation. Also, Adelia does, financial education. Rashida does looking for if you want to relocate out the country. Okay, so you have all these different options available to you, right? So I've talked about in terms of how to find a therapist. I've talked about the signs that you might need support. With the women that I've interviewed over the course of this year on my YouTube channel, If There's a Clown Consulting, Wellness Services, we've been very open about our healing journey. And we've talked about, the need a lot of times for therapy, right? And it's been very helpful. Okay. So again, if you want to look at any of those videos that I have on my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. And also, a lot of the Black women that I've interviewed, they have resources available for you. So access those videos, access those resources. Alicia Renice, talks a lot about, as Black women, how do we really come to a point of really accepting ourselves, forgiving ourselves. And it's very important when you're in a toxic job or you've left a toxic job, how do you really practice self-forgiveness and self-compassion? Because sometimes we think to ourselves, why did I stay at that job so long? Or why did I let those people do those things to me, right? There might be many reasons for that, but it doesn't help us to stay in the past. It's helpful for us to process that, right? And to go through all we need to go through in terms of healing. Anne-Marie Archer and myself, a lot of other Black women, Colette Elizabeth, we talk about that the healing is an ongoing journey. So therapy might help jump it off, right? Coaching might help jump it off, but the healing process many times is an ongoing process, okay? So I've talked about therapy. I've talked about all these different ways to support yourself. One thing that I want to share with you also is that I do have a coaching program for Black women who are leaving toxic jobs. So this is for women who are ready to leave or they've already left a toxic job, okay? And the coaching program that I have really helps you deal with all of the healing stuff, right? In terms of all the trauma and drama that you've gone through that toxic job, how to process that, metabolize it, so you're able to have a greater sense of clarity in terms of your next steps, and you're able to connect to more of the joy in your life, okay? So if you're interested in that coaching program, I have a cohort going on now. The next cohort starts the third week of February. So the registration deadline will be February 14th. I will put the information in the description section. And if you're not ready for coaching, if you're just like, I'm just so like overloaded right now, I'm stressed out, I just feel lost. If you feel that way, I also have something for you, the Welcome to Your Queendom Digital Fillable Workbook. And this is something that I use for myself. When I felt lost in this toxic job that I was in, resigned from, that I used a roadmap to help me go forward, right? And so the digital fillable workbook helps you get that sense of direction. Okay, so I'll put all that information. Now I see some comments in the chat. I'm going to respond to these comments. I'm in the UK and I was unable to access anyone. The therapist that I did get was a white middle-aged male, and he said he couldn't cope with what I told him. Said he felt secondhand trauma. I'm so sorry about that, right? I'm so sorry. And that's something that I hear from a lot of Black women in terms of why they choose to work with a Black therapist or Black woman therapist. Okay. Now, because you are in the UK, I would suggest if there is a professional organization in the UK that deals with like psychologists, contact them. Or if there's a organization within the UK that deals specifically with Black therapists, if you can contact them and see if they have a resource directory. Okay. So I would definitely do that. And then I see another comment. I stayed because I was a single mom and was being bullied by a narcissistic manager. It was like being in a boxing ring for 8 years. I'm so sorry, sis. And I know that many of us feel that sense of being attacked, right? And we're attacked, it's important for us to take a moment, like how do we get into a space to heal, right? And we might need that support. So my hope is that you are able to locate people who are able to support your healing, right? So again, I am a psychologist and I've gone to therapy, and I can definitely say therapy has been very powerful for me, particularly, in relation to healing, the healing journey from a toxic job. And so I just want to come on very briefly to talk about ways that you can also access a Black therapist. Okay. So that comment in terms of feeling that sometimes people who don't have that lived experience, there might be a disconnect. Again, I've heard that from many clients, and that's why they seek out a Black therapist, particularly a Black woman therapist. Okay. So I'm just going to come on very short, briefly, and just share that information with you. Again, I'll have all that information description section on my YouTube channel, Lifting As We Climb Consulting Wellness Services. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And please share this information with other Black women. And please get the support that you need. You deserve to be well. You deserve to be respected and affirmed. And you don't deserve to be mistreated in a toxic job. Okay. So I'm signing off, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Take care. Bye bye.